The smartest birds at your feeder are exactly the ones you're trying to get rid of. An avian intelligence original. Here is something most bird feeding guides will never tell you. The birds that dominate your feeder aren't there by accident. They earned that position. Not through luck, not through numbers alone, but through a set of cognitive abilities. These are objectively more sophisticated than the birds you actually wanted to attract. That is the uncomfortable truth, hiding inside every problem. Bird conversation. We frame these species as nuisances, but what we're actually describing is intelligence, adaptive, flexible, socially coordinated intelligence operating at a level most birds can't match. Understanding why they win tells you how behavioral hierarchies actually form, and what that means for every competitive system you're part of. Number 5. Common grackle, the bird that runs a social network. Most birds at a feeder operate as individuals. They arrive, they eat, they leave. The common grackle does something fundamentally different. It operates as a node in a network. Grackles roost communally in flocks that can number in the thousands. Research on blackbird foraging found that communal roosts function as information centers, locations where successful foragers are observed by unsuccessful ones, who then follow them. When one grackle finds your well-stocked feeder, it doesn't just eat. It reports back. The flock arrives not because they are randomly wandering, but because your feeder is logged. This is why grackle arrivals feel sudden and overwhelming. There is no gradual discovery process. There is a scout, then a flock. Your feeder went from unknown to optimized resource. Many feeder watchers have noticed their resident grackles develop specific individual behaviors. One learned to soak hard seeds in the bird bath. Another follows the homeowner around. These aren't random quirks. Grackles score high on avian problem-solving assessments. They demonstrate behavioral flexibility that most feeder birds simply don't show. The bird you're calling a bully is, by any objective measure, a sophisticated animal. That doesn't mean the rest of your birds don't suffer for it. It means you're not dealing with a pest. You're dealing with a better competitor. Number 4. European starling, the bird that learned to use tools it didn't evolve with. The starling's success in North America isn't a story about aggression. It is a story about cognitive plasticity. The ability to learn new things, behaviors adapt rapidly, and apply them in environments that bear no resemblance to the one the animal evolved in. Starlings were released into New York City in 1890 by Eugene Schieffelin, who wanted to populate North America with every bird mentioned in Shakespeare. From roughly 100 individuals, the population has since grown to an estimated 200 million. That expansion required constant behavioral adaptation, including new food sources, new nesting sites, and new competitors. Species that can't adapt to novel environments don't expand like that. But species that can, do. At your feeder, the starling's adaptability shows up as resource exploitation at a pace native species can't match. Studies have documented that European starlings assess feeder profitability, food type, feeding rate, and competition level. They update their foraging strategies faster than most co-foraging species. They don't just arrive and eat. They evaluate, adjust, and optimize. A tube feeder that a starling can't access today will be re-examined tomorrow from a different angle. Their mimicry adds another layer, as starlings can reproduce the calls of over 20 North American bird species, including predator alarm calls. And while intentional deception hasn't been demonstrated, there are documented cases of other birds flushing from feeders in response to starling-produced hawk calls. The feeding area is temporarily cleared. Whether deliberate or incidental, the effect is the same. The problem isn't that starlings are invaders. The problem is that they brought a cognitive toolkit that North American feeder communities weren't built to compete with. Number 3. Cooper's hawk, the bird that turns your feeder into a calculated trap. The Cooper's hawk doesn't use intelligence the way the Grackle does. It uses patience. It uses the exploitation of patterns that other animals create without realizing it. A mature Cooper's hawk will surveil a feeding station over multiple days before committing to a hunt. Research tracked suburban Cooper's hawks using GPS telemetry and found that individuals maintained mental maps of productive hunting locations. Returning to the same sites across multiple seasons, they time their visits to peak activity windows. Your feeder, if it is consistent and well-stocked, has almost certainly been mapped. What makes the Cooper's hawk particularly effective is that it hunts the behavioral vulnerability that feeders create. Birds that use feeders regularly develop what ecologists call site fidelity, a strong attachment to a familiar location. That attachment overrides some of their normal predator avoidance behavior. They take slightly longer to flush, and they return slightly faster after a disturbance. A hawk that has watched a feeder long enough knows exactly how much margin it has. Cooper's hawks were nearly absent from suburban landscapes 50 years ago, long before DDT and human intervention. Direct persecution had collapsed their population. Since the 1972 DDT ban, their recovery has been dramatic, and their colonization of suburban habitats has followed the expansion of bird feeding as a hobby almost precisely. They didn't follow the seed. They followed the concentration of birds that the seed created. Their presence should disturb you and impress you in equal measure. A predator smart enough to learn your schedule is a predator operating at a level most backyard birders never give it credit for. Number 2. Brown-headed cowbird, the bird running the longest con in North American wildlife. Every other species on this list competes for resources directly. The brown-headed cowbird has evolved a strategy that is, in behavioral terms, extraordinarily more sophisticated. It outsources its reproduction entirely and uses its competitors' parental instincts against them. Female cowbirds are among the most systematic, surveillance-based foragers in North American wildlife. They spend the early breeding season doing nothing but locating and monitoring active nests, tracking the incubation schedules of multiple host species simultaneously, and assessing clutch sizes, timing their parasitic deposits to the precise window when the nest is unattended. Ornithologists have documented individual female cowbirds monitoring up to 40 host nests in a single season, successfully parasitizing a high percentage of them, which is just exhausting to think about. The behavioral mechanism that makes cowbird parasitism work is something cognitive scientists call sign-stimulus exploitation. The cowbird egg triggers the host bird's parental care response so reliably that the host cannot suppress it. Even when behavioral cues, size, sound, and appearance of the chick are inconsistent with the parent's own species, the chick is not tricking the host through conscious deception. It is pressing an instinctual button that evolution never equipped the host to override. Research in behavioral ecology has shown that cowbird parasitism rates in suburban environments can exceed 70% for some host species, and that this rate correlates directly with the density of bird feeders in the surrounding area. Feeders attract hosts, and hosts attract cowbirds. Cowbirds don't need to find the nests themselves, because the feeder network does the reconnaissance for them. The cowbird isn't cruel. It is operating a behavioral system of extraordinary elegance. Understanding it doesn't make the outcome less damaging, but it forces you to see the mechanism clearly, which is the only way to begin to address it. Number 1. House sparrow, the bird that won by becoming everything. The house sparrow is not the most intelligent individual bird at your feeder. What it is something more formidable. A behavioral generalist at a level of completeness that almost no other species has achieved. Most birds have preferences, seed types they favor, or habitat configurations they require, social structures they depend on. Those preferences are also vulnerabilities. The house sparrow has systematically minimized every such vulnerability. It eats nearly anything in nests, in nearly any enclosed cavity. It tolerates human proximity at distances that send most wild birds into flight. It operates effectively in temperatures from Arctic winters to desert summers. It has colonized every continent except Antarctica and established populations in environments ranging from Himalayan villages to sub-Saharan market towns. In North America, introduced in Brooklyn in 1851 as an insect controller, it reached coast-to-coast coverage within 50 years. Its current continental population is estimated at 150 million. The Cornell Labs NestWatch database shows consistent data in suburban areas with high house sparrow density. Nest box success rates for eastern bluebirds, tree swallows, and house wrens are substantially lower. Not because sparrows are aggressive in isolation, but because their coverage is so complete that native cavity nesters find very few uncontested sites. The emotional complexity around the house sparrow in the birding community is real, and it is worth naming directly. There are people for whom they are everything, the species that got them through a hard winter, the familiar faces outside a window. That attachment is genuine. It doesn't erase the ecological record. It just means the conversation is harder than the scientific framing suggests. What the house sparrow demonstrates is that adaptability is its own form of dominance, one that doesn't require size, aggression, or specialized weaponry. It just requires the capacity to function well enough in enough different conditions that nothing can fully exclude it. What you're actually looking at, every species on this list got to your feeder the same way, by being better than the alternatives at exploiting available conditions. The Grackle's social network, the Starling's cognitive flexibility, the hawk's patience, the cowbird's behavioral outsourcing, the sparrow's relentless generalism. These aren't flaws in the animals. They are the qualities that make them successful, qualities that the smaller, more specialized birds simply cannot match. Avian intelligence keeps returning to the same conclusion across every study of feeder ecology. The birds that lose out aren't losing because of bad luck. They're losing because the environment has been structured by human choices in ways that systematically favor the competitors. That is fixable, but only if you stop calling them bad birds and start calling them what they actually are. The better adapted players in a game whose rules you helped write. What you just learned isn't really about birds. It is about what happens when you set up a system without thinking through who it is actually designed to reward. Follow Avian Intelligence for weekly deep dives into bird behavior and cognition. Which of these behaviors surprised you most? Tell us in the comments.